Eric Mangini, Jets Browns head coach, now a Fox Sports analyst, joining us. So I saw a story this week, which is really interesting. I've said before is I've seen a lot of executives in my business through the years that the kind of culture changes and they don't get less intelligent, but they get a little outdated because they've lived in this world and then the world changes. And I've seen it in football. And Belichick's no less smart today than 5 years ago. But the league is sort of pivoted to a very offensive league. They've taken a lot of rules and given the offense huge advantages. I saw a story the other day. He's still ticked off at Mac Jones for seeking help outside of the organization. And my takeaway is you made Joe Judge a quarterback coach and a DC and OC. Mac felt trapped. He was taking all the heat. He was getting ripped. And the kid's looking for help. So as a coach, I side with Mac. I don't think he's their biggest problem. How do you view Bill still being mad at Mac seeking outside help in last year's mess?
Yeah, look, I'm a guy who understands grudges by Bill Belichick, but in this situation, I'm definitely siding more with him. And I've always had an issue with the way that Mac Jones has treated where he was lucky enough to get drafted. I thought it was a perfect situation for him. I thought having Josh McDaniels and that offensive staff that he had and the system that they had was incredibly fortunate for him and a really good fit. And it never felt like he appreciated it. I remember when Josh left and he was like, well, that's it. That's fine. I've had a bunch of offensive coordinators. I'll just deal with the next guy. And I get what you're saying. Bill's getting up in age, but one thing that you can't accuse him of is being status quo. He tried something that nobody else would try. He took a chance that nobody else would take. And typically that's the trademark of younger executives. To push limits like that. It didn't work. It didn't work out great, but he was still trying to do something that he thought had a chance to potentially be really successful. And he's always worked at staying ahead of the curve. I didn't love that Mac Jones went outside the building. That's not what you do. Tom Brady didn't go outside the building with as much success as he had. They got into a little bit of a beef later on in his career because he wanted to bring in his own trainer, but that was after 6 Super Bowls? I don't love Mac Jones' approach, and I get why there might be some resentment on Bill's part.
So let's, although wouldn't you argue that as an adult, you got to get over stuff? I mean, right? Like I understand 12-year-olds holding grudges. If you're a 70-year-old guy, the grudge business is a little petty, is it not?
Well, look, we also hear one small part of the story. Who knows what else has gone on in the building? And who knows, how deep the level of undercutting the guys that were there took place. Maybe Mac Jones was fighting the decision from the beginning, which made it a lot more difficult for the decision to be successful. So yeah, on a very superficial level, if you're looking at it as holding a grudge where he's at, and it's just that simple, then you do need to move on from it. But I'm guessing there's more to the story, and there's probably more than one incident that showed up over the course of that last season.
Yeah, you and Bill had your issues. Kraft and Belichick apparently at odds. I read that story. It seems to me, here's my knock on Belichick. You can't forever tell the room and the culture. It's not about stats. It's about winning. And then I hear that Belichick really cares about the all-time win total. That's the opposite of what you preach. Bobby Knight had that tendency to preach, I want you to play under control, and Bob was never under control. Isn't that the hypocritical message by Belichick, if that is true, that the Shula record means a lot to him?
Yeah, I don't think he ever imagined he was going to be in the position where he was going to have a chance to get the Shula record. And I didn't think that Bill would coach this late into his career. We used to talk and he'd say, yeah, if I'm still coaching when I'm X age, make sure you talk me out of it type thing. Like he didn't see himself as being a lifer, but now he's here. And now that goal is within reach. I'm sure it's something that would be amazing for him to get. I don't think it's front of mind. I don't think that every day he wakes up and says, I gotta get this goal. I'm sure he's more interested in making sure that, he can win and win on a consistent level without Tom Brady. That to me is more of a threat to the legacy than whether or not he gets the Shula record.
Okay, I want to ask you about Bryce Young. My takeaway, I did it earlier, it was my kind of opening rant, which is moving is hard and it's expensive. So you don't move for just a slightly better view or a slightly better school district. You move because you're making an upgrade. It's going to cost you money. Carolina gave up their best receiver, 2 seconds and a first. I don't think they're moving up for a good prospect. I think they look at Bryce Young and go, listen, he's short, but he is by far and away the most polished, accurate, big game ready quarterback. That's my takeaway. You don't make that move for a raw guy that you hope can turn into something. That's just giving up too much money and too much work without knowing. Am I nuts?
I think there's good parts to your point, but typically you don't want to move into a smaller house, if you're moving, and that's the situation that you're facing with Bryce Young. And you look at what San Francisco did. They moved and they gave up a ton of future draft picks to make the move that they did. And it didn't seem like there was total consensus on who they wanted to take at the end of the day between Trey Lance and Mac Jones. And I think the move more, Colin, is if we're going to go and get a quarterback, let's make sure we can get the quarterback that we want. I don't necessarily know that or am convinced that they had a guy in mind. They just wanted to make sure whenever they made that decision on who the guy was going to be, they didn't have to wait for somebody else to pick to see whether or not they got their guy. So that's the conviction I thought they had. We need a quarterback. We want to get the quarterback that we want. The only way to do that is go to number one. I'm just not sure they were convinced that it was Bryce Young or whether it was, C.J. Stroud or whoever.
Does C.J. Stroud, anything about him worry you?
I was trying to think of which Ohio State quarterback in the last 20 years has been really successful.
None.
That worries me. That when you've got a program that's been as good as Ohio State's been year after year, with a lot of really good quarterback candidates that have come out of there, and they haven't had that level of success. And look, that could be a little bit unfair to C.J. Stroud to say that he's going to fall the way that the other guys have fallen or not rise the way you hope they'd rise. But that's the track record. And there's some concern when that happens with a program over time, and you think, maybe it's the sum of the parts as opposed to that guy being able to raise everybody else up. Yeah,
well, I mean, Ohio State, I've said this before, Alabama may be the best team in the SEC, but they'll face 4 or 5 powers, so your quarterback will face NFL bodies everywhere. The difference between Ohio State and every other Big Ten team not named Michigan is not even close athletically. The Purdue's, the Illinois. As good as Alabama is, there are years Georgia and LSU have more talent. There are years Auburn's had as much talent. So you do get a truer barometer, a quarterback in the South, this is what he is. I've seen these Ohio State guys, those are a lot of wide open wide receivers on drag routes, turning them into touchdowns against Purdue. And I'm like, I don't know. So that part worries me. And I think it's easy to say you can't blame C.J. Stroud, but when anything happens for 50 years in a row, there's probably a reason, right?
Yeah, you look at that, and look, I drafted a lot of Ohio State guys, and sometimes I got fooled by that because the other thing that happens with programs like Ohio State or Alabama, a lot of those guys are at their ceiling because the program's so good, because the development's so good, the talent's so good, that by the time they get in the NFL, there's not a huge jump that those guys make. So you ideally want a player that not only is really good, but they're not at their ceiling. Because when they come into the NFL, they're going to face a lot of challenges that they never had to face. And especially at Ohio State, you're not facing the most complex defenses week in and week out either.
Yeah, I mean, go look at wide receiver. The best one in the league is arguably from Fresno State. One of the other ones is from Maryland. One of the other ones is from Eastern Washington. So the truth is, those guys got double coverage at their colleges because they were by far and away the best athlete. So they face double coverage by the time they're 18 years old. If you go to Ohio State, you can't double any of those receivers. and you're playing, you have such, I mean, it's like a left tackle at Ohio State. It's never facing his equal outside of maybe Michigan. Whereas Cooper Kupp, the entire game plan was designed to stop Cooper Kupp. And I do think there's value to this. I really do. That wide receiver is crazy to me. You'd think all the best wide receivers came from all the powers, and it's remarkable how many don't, right?
And it's not only that they've had to deal with so much coverage, but there's also that those programs typically aren't as developed. They don't have the resources. They don't have the strength and conditioning staffs. They don't have the offseason programs, the level of coaching, all the other things that go into getting a guy to his maximum potential. If you bring in one of those guys that's a little bit more raw and he takes a jump, you've got a chance to really hit it big.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.